Hello everyone. I'm going to do just a quick overview review of the Yokomo R12 C3. This is like the latest kit from Yokomo. So this is my first experience building and running a Yokomo chassis, and overall the build was really good, even though the instructions were all in Japanese. Everything went quite well. Everything was well illustrated. Um, some of you may or may not know Yokomo has its own like unique suspension design. I don't know if you can see that. The springs are located in the center underneath the stops there, and you have the special damper tubes set up there. Many of the local guys that I race with here in Japan say it's really difficult to set up, and luckily for me, I have a touring car background, and so setting up and tweaking suspension, making sure everything's even left right is no problem. And I find it's quite enjoyable, adjusting the suspension parameters, ride height. In order to adjust the ride height, what you have to do is you have to take a wrench, a 2 mil wrench, and adjust it with a wrench like so, and you just turn it down, just only incremental turns. What I usually do is I turn it down until I get the proper ride height, and then I take a set of calipers like these guys here, and I measure the width from the top to the bottom. I measure the spacing, and try to make them as even as possible. And then what I also make sure to do is make sure that there's some up travel. So if you can see here, the suspension is planted down, just tap it down a bit, and the suspension should just rise a little bit. Some of the guys on the forum mentioned to, set the droop between the value of, 0.4 to 0.8 millimeters. Ideally, you want to aim for about 0.5 worth of up travel. And it's quite easy to do. You can take one of these tools here, which has small increments, put it underneath the chassis, like so, and measure the ride height, and then just simply raise the chassis up just also slightly and just slide the gauge down and count the difference. And that's an easy way to measure it. The sway bar, there's another video that I posted about the sway bar and how it was tweaked. What I ended up doing is just simply taking it with my hands and twisting it until I got it relatively flat, and that seemed to have settled down the suspension quite nicely. What was the other thing? Adjusting the I guess the droop screws, which are these guys here, this screw and this screw on the opposite side. There's various ways of measuring it. What I tend to do is, instead of just measuring under the suspension arm, what I do is I measure it from the actual kingpin. So for example, you got your kingpin right here. What I do is I lay this gauge down flat of a known value, which this is going to be 10 millimeters. Actually, where's the other tool that I use here? This one would be better. So this is measured out to be 10 millimeters in height. And what I do is I take this gauge, and what I do, since there's a tire on there, the ride height's obviously changed, so I slide this gauge until it touches, and I simply tap the suspension to see when it actually makes contact with whatever increment. For example, say that, let's get this in focus. Say that on this side of the car, I have it at 5.2 millimeters. And I measure the other side, and it's 5.4. What I do is I measure to make sure that the kingpin is touching at the same level at 5.2. Now, what's important is I take off the sway bar to avoid any tweak, because there is always just a little bit of tweak in it. And I also take off the damper tubes, depending on the damper tube oil. if you have really heavy damper tube oil, that will affect the suspension dropping down. So I take that off so everything's moving freely. But you know, it's up to you with how you want to measure um, your kingpin height or your droop stops. What's the next thing? Oh, the ball cups that come with the kit. Unfortunately, these guys here, um, they generated a lot of slop, and what I ended up doing is I went online. Since I'm based in Japan, since I'm in Japan, I went online and I found this company called TN Racing, which offers like a composite ball cup, which just eliminates the slack completely out of the ball cups, which is phenomenal. Just took out all the play, and now I don't have to worry about any funny things when it comes to handling with the car. Um, what else did I do? That's pretty much the front suspension. Um, I tried mucking around with the roll centers. The roll centers currently on here are 0.5. So the roll center is easy. This setting is the kit setting, so it's easier to drive. If I went down to 0 millimeter, that will give me more camber gain, which will give me more steering. So it made the car a little bit edgy for my tastes. Um, what else did I build? When you're building the shocks, try not to overfill the shocks with oil. You know, with typical shocks, you can just simply bleed them out. But with these Yokomo shocks, inside, when you're assembling them, you'll notice that there's like a little foam donut, which will help absorb the additional oil. But it can only absorb so much, and if there's too much pressure in the shock, it will the center clip, which you could just see there, will pop out, and it's a real pain. I remember building my first couple of shocks, and it was such a pain. Just you don't have to add a lot of shock oil in there, just enough. I think there's kind of like inside the actual shock body, you'll see like there might be like an indication line where you should stop filling the oil. Same goes with this guy here, which is your roll damper. These can be a little bit of a pain to fill because you really don't need a lot of oil to fill this guy. What I use green slime to build the shocks, you know, just to make sure that there's no sticking going on with the piston rod and the rubber O-rings. What I tend to do with trying to get like the perfect shock or roll shock is once I drop in the plastic spacer and then next goes in the rubber O-ring, what I do is I take like a small, you know, like a 1.5 millimeter driver, and I just kind of move the O-ring around, just trying to slosh and move out any excess oil. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. I guess it really depends on how old the seal is. What else? The differential on this car is phenomenal. I don't know, but Yokomo offers this thrust bearing, which I don't know whether or not any other manufacturer, RC manufacturer, has one of these, but phenomenal thrust bearing. Currently, I'm just running the stock differential balls in this differential, and it's just butter smooth. I'm really impressed with it, and I think it's all attributed to this guy right here. So, from what I understand, this runs like a standard American dimensioned, I guess that's not the term, you know, standard axle, you know, associated axle. So if you guys want a nice smooth running diff, you can go for one of these guys, and they're not too expensive. 580 yen, Gohaku Hachiju yen, that's probably around $5 and maybe $6 American. Worthwhile getting. Motor mount screws. I've been having issues with this motor shifting. This is an Orca TX. Just like a slight contact, the motor actually moves, and I'm contemplating switching out the screws to get something to hold onto that motor a little bit better. But overall, the car works wonders, and there's no complaints whatsoever with the chassis, really. Oh, I was reading up, I think, on a UK web forum. Mark Stiles, I think. He mentioned to move the roll springs to the inner hole. You can either have the springs, the stock setting would be to have the springs touching the actual roll links, whereas this one's on the inbound inner hole, so there's two holes. This one will touch the side links, this one will touch the inside of the chassis. I moved it in to the inside of the chassis, and I think Mark Stiles, correct me if I'm wrong, mentioned to get like a grub screw that's about 14 millimeters in length. I didn't have one at the time, and so I just came up with the idea of taking a pinion grub screw, threading it down into the bottom of the spring retainer, which will give me some additional length with the grub screw that comes with the kit. And I was able to thread the grub screw down that's from the kit into there, and I was able to get the length, the appropriate length needed. So I was lucky on that part, but you know, who knows, it might wobble out and I'll lose the side spring, who knows. But overall, really impressed with the chassis. I came from running Kyosho Plasma RA, which is this guy right here. Great chassis to start off with as a beginner. I just never got the car to handle as well as I did with this Yokomo, and I don't think I'll be going back to the Kyosho anytime soon. So yeah, really impressed with the Yokomo. Layout, chassis balance, really nice. When you make the adjustments are felt on the track. And you know, when it comes to the front suspension, yeah, it looks a little complicated, it looks a little tricky, but you know, the only real adjustments that you need to make are your ride height springs, which are these guys here, and the droop screws, which are here. Whatever you do, always make sure that there is a little bit of droop in your suspension. If there's no droop and you notice that the ride height's not changing, then your set screws underneath are going against the springs, and you're just going nowhere with that. Anyway, if you have any questions, let me know. Feel free to post. Yeah, if you're really keen on a new 1/12 race chassis, I highly suggest the Yokomo. And if you're hemming and hawing about, oh, well, you know, the rear axle, you know, only accepts Yokomo style rims, there's a company based in Japan. Actually, I mentioned them earlier, called TN Racing, and they offer an axle, a complete axle kit for I think around about $40. That allows you to run associated styles wheels, so regular wheels, and so that's worth getting. I'm not gonna get into running different axles. I'm just gonna run with what the car has, because you know, hell, the rims look pretty sweet. Anyway, hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask. All right, bye bye.